Mr. Speaker, the skillful attempt to reduce or slow down the number of applications received for pension to stay within the pronounced liability has not gone unnoticed. Asking people to, well, the time for sending in this is past and all kinds of stuff. No, they say we're going to pay. And government left a lot of money, pay. There are no deadlines in law for submitting applications, so encourage pensioners to continue to apply for their benefits. Mr. Speaker, the current situation. Mr. Speaker, Grenada is again at the crossroads. Grenada have experienced 13.8% decline in its gross domestic product of growth in 2020. Yes, under me, and yes, my friend, you remember COVID-19? Do you remember this? I noticed the presentation never mentioned, hardly any mention about COVID-19. But Grenada has been lauded as one of the best performers as far as economic activity during COVID-19. Take it in your pipe and smoke it, Mr. Speaker. Yes, that's why we're saying it. We could afford to say it. The country is currently in a state of economic recovery with a growth rate, according to the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, of 4.69% and 3.73% in 2021 and the end of 2022, respectively. Mathematically, this means that we are still in the red or negative relative to the 13.8% contraction heading into 2023. So you cannot boast. We're still in the red. Moreover, future growth prospect in Grenada's major source market for tourism is expected to contract from 3.7% in 2022 to 1.7% by 2025. Global recovery on a whole is considered a challenge given the geopolitical tensions that exist, the lockdowns in China, the war in Ukraine, and the disruptions in the UK. Mr. Speaker, Grenada is part of the global village. Affecting the global economy will continue to have spillover effects, impacting on all sectors of our economy. Mr. Speaker, in addition, remember, St. George's University is now experiencing almost a serious drop in student enrollment for medical school. And since they are about 25% of our GDP, expect that will have serious impact, not just on the university ability to do the things that they're planning to do, but also the services level throughout the length and breadth of Grenada, Carriacou, and PT.3. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister is unaware of the macroeconomic context in which this budget is presented. And let me give. On page 10, take your books out. On page 10 of the Medium-Term Fiscal Report Framework 2023, that's a government document, Mr. Speaker, report that was laid before this Honorable House, along with the estimate of revenue and expenditure, it indicated, and I quote, growth is expected, listen to that, growth is expected to decelerate in 2023. That's the government document that they gave us, unquote. While the Minister of Finance in his budget statement stated on page 6 of his budget statement, he said, the economy is expected to expand in 2023. Which one should I believe? Which one, Mrs. I've given you several instances and I would ask a question at the end of it. We get one document with numbers given by the officers, I assume, in the Ministry of Finance. And then the Prime Minister in his budget statement, I don't know, maybe for political reasons or somebody write a speech somewhere else. Mr. Speaker, then the Minister of Prime Minister not understand the economic numbers? Was it an attempt to deceive the people about the growth prospects of the country for 2023? Mr. Speaker, I know he's not a numbers man, but at least if you give a document saying one thing, it has to be consistent with statements you make. Mr. Speaker, as admitted by the government, they inherited a healthy treasury with Grenada in sound financial standing. However, the pressures that come with this world crisis must be properly managed to safeguard our fiscal credibility obtained through the sacrifices made by all Grenadians over the years. This is the true test of leadership, not winning an election on false promise to make everyone permanent and at the same time provide them with pension as per the 1958 Act, but rather managing the economic challenges in a way that it cushions the effects on the most vulnerable among us, creating opportunities through the public sector investment programs of the government while controlling expenditure in the public sector. Particularly the wage bill, which I will come to, and by extension the current expenditure, as such costs are largely funded by revenues obtained from taxation. Mr. Speaker, what was said in the budget statement by the Honorable Minister of Finance and Prime Minister were broad statements that were well sugar-coated, nice language. That's lawyers good at that, you know. When you afraid them for that, yeah, I can't speak like them. The truth about all the sweet talk is reflected in the numbers. Numbers, Mr. Speaker, they don't lie. As stated in the 500-plus page document referred to as the Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure 2023, the document, as you would know, is comprised of two parts, namely the areas where revenues will be collected and the programs and areas where the said revenues will be spent, consistent with government's overreaching policy. Mr. Speaker, as the saying government goes, I repeat, numbers do not lie. So permit me to tell the story of numbers in this order: allocation, revenues, and expenditure. Let me go through them one by one. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance identifies 6 areas of allocation that supports his so-called transformation agenda. I wish to proffer some comments on those and a few other areas of major disconnection between what was said in the speech and what is actually in the budget document of estimates of revenue and expenditure. I'm taking the 2 documents. Read your documents. Don't condemn the person speaking. Read the documents. Condemn the documents, not me. 1. The area of health and wellness is said to have an increase in allocation of $17.1 million. And he said the largest in the history of Grenada. Mr. Speaker, allocating funds to spend is one thing, but the areas in which they are targeting is even more critical. And additional funds were budgeted for 4% salary increases to workers in 2023. More contract work were budgeted for. Illegal work, you know. So said my beloved Minister of Finance. The budget for the religious affairs was not originally part of the Ministry of Health, and funds for advisory and consulting services, Mr. Speaker, all this were added, Mr. Speaker. More money for the big boys, the big consultants, and the big directors, and what do you call them? No, I'm not going to call them. Mr. Speaker, we'll delve further into glaring increases in contract work that was supposed to be illegal. Mr. Speaker, $10 million was also budgeted for projects started and initiated by the new National Party's government. Number 2, Minister of Finance and Prime Minister spoke of the largest allocation of the Ministry of Education. He's so proud. With an increase of $11.4 million. Again, where are these increases, Mr. Speaker, concentrated? Just listen. The increases are in the area of salaries and wages, contract work, funds for advisors, and consultant services. The poor man, not there at all, Mr. Speaker. 824, road walk in the hot sun, that's what he's there for, Mr. Speaker. We continue to see the growth in payment of advisors and consultants. That's the ones we're concerned about, the big boys. We're going to hear about them in revenue and the customs, and we can hear more. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister informed, he said that nothing was done for the creative industry. I was appalled that anyone stand in Parliament and say nothing was done for the creative industry. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if there was a lack of understanding of what encompasses the creative industry. But I give the Prime Minister more credit. Over the years, Mr. Speaker, the government have invested millions of dollars in the Festival of the Arts, the establishment of music labs in school, provide support for community-based mass bands and fashion designers, support work for Spice Mass and Cultural Foundation, and invested $10 million in the Seamoon Cultural Center, the pride and joy of the people of St. Andrews. But nothing is done for the creative sector. If this is to explore the areas and consolidate all the existing efforts, that is appropriate, Mr. Speaker, and I will give them credit. In other words, take what is there, build on it, you'll get a lot of credit. Mr. Speaker, however, to say nothing has been done for the creative industry demonstrates a lack of institutional knowledge. This is manifested in the approach taken to this particular sector, where culture is in one place and the creative industry is like a creature independent of our cultural expressions. Mr. Speaker, as I said before, a lack of recognition of the foundation that one is affording would cause an ad hoc approach to strengthening and consolidating gains. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance stated on page 12 of the budget statement that the budget for the Ministry of Agriculture was $54.3 million. And he said the largest ever, with a $14.3 million increase. Mr. Speaker, I am not sure what estimates of revenue and expenditure the Prime Minister was reading from. But the budget in the Ministry of Agriculture set forth on page 468 of the estimate says $39.4 million. My, what is this? Numbers don't make sense. Allow me to advise the Minister of Finance that there is a $19 million increase. If you look at the real budget, you will see that NNP had $19 more million than even what he has announced, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, numbers do not lie. The next one, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Infrastructure is said to have the largest budget of $143.1 million, as stated on page 12. I give you the page, of the budget speech given by the Minister of Finance. However, on page 338 of the estimate, it contradicts the stated quoted numbers reflected in the budget. It says $131 million budget. Well, where was the Prime Minister getting these numbers from? $98 million less than what was spent by the NNC administration. Mr. Speaker, we spent over $229 million. But he said he did the largest one ever. He might turn his thing and say we wasted the money. Like the St. George's Road and so on, we wasted it. Mr. Speaker, another one. On page 23 of the speech given by the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, he highlights that social services budget is $32.9 million. While on page 356 of the estimates reflect $36.5 million budget for social services. In other words, one in the Prime Minister's speech, one in the document. I don't know which one to believe. Which one? Do we come back here and have a new Prime Minister's speech, a new budget, or do we throw the document like Nancy Pelosi did with some speech and just tear it up and throw it in the trash? Do we do that? I don't know which one to do. But it can't remain so. They have to mesh. They have to be consistent. A $7 million cut relative to what was spent in that specific area. Again, attack on the poor. Wherever the government cuts, the poor is the one that pays the price. This government like the big boys. This glaring error continued to show a disconnect between the budget speech presented and what was actually budgeted by the government. Here one again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on page 26 of the budget speech, the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister, he spoke about the beautification, nice word, you know, beautification, enhancement, sustainability, and transformation project. Big words, woo! Me, if I hear that, I'm balling. Beautification, enhancement, sustainability, transformation, I might bite my tongue. Mr. Speaker, there is no such project named in the estimates. It is not in the estimates, you know, but the Prime Minister is talking about it. So if you intend to add it. But it's not there. It's not there. Mr. Speaker, it is important that the programs in the estimate by name and code are what is spent on. You can't spend otherwise. The name is important in the document. Conversely, projects stated in the budget speech, it has no meaning if the said projects are not placed in the estimate. You just can't say things to sound nice and about beautiful speech, lovely speech, we go. And you're not there. It's not there. It's not there, Mr. Speaker. The big name, it's not there. Mr. Speaker, the budget speech on page 32 of the, to be exact, spoke to a $15 million allocation for medium-term, small, and micro enterprise. There is no evidence of the same in the estimates. If you misname it, that's not my problem. It has to be accurate. It has to be accurate. It has to be what it says in each document. You can't have one name here and another name there. Simple. Moreover, on page 41 of the speech, the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister advised of an employment agency. I ain't seen no employment agency in the estimates. I would love to see that because I think it may not be a bad move if it's properly managed. Mr. Speaker, I do not know if the Minister of Finance got his speech written in the south of the island, while the estimates of revenue and expenditure and macroeconomic context in which it was cast was done at the Ministry of Finance on the Carenage, St. George's. Somebody write something, and some person put in numbers. I have been in this house when a budget was presented, and what was given by the officers in the Ministry of Finance. When it was read, many of the numbers were changed. I am not saying this Prime Minister did this. I make no aspersion on this. What I'm saying is that if it's one number in the estimate, one name in the estimates, must be the same thing on your speech. It cannot be different. Mr. Speaker, this is the point I really want to make. Revenue, Mr. Speaker. The expected revenues of the state of Grenada for 2020, as documented in the budget, are driven by taxation and citizenship, by investment, with an expected collection in those areas of $739.3 million and $240 million, respectively. The budgeted amount for the expected tax in collections for 2023 is greater than what contained in the years 2013 and through 2019, before the onset of the pandemic and the economic fallout that followed. Mr. Speaker, what I mean is important. This, Mr. Speaker, is a period of an expected decline from the medium-term report, you know. I assume it's done by professionals. Not what the Prime Minister says they're going to be growth. These are words by a lawyer, not the professionals. Mr. Speaker, in a period of decline in growth, a reduction in specific taxes. Even if you have increased tax on sugar and on non-fizzy and sweet drinks, increased tax on alcohol, the reintroduction of VAT and the environmental levy on households consuming 500 kilowatts of electricity, coupled with tax amnesty, the government intends to collect 71 million and more in taxes in 2023 relative to 2022, when there is going to be a reduction in the growth of the country. When in fact, many of the steps taken to reduce taxes will in fact come into play. But they expect, you see, you could write something, Mr. Speaker. These numbers, I am telling Mr. Speaker, this House, I am saying here, I am estimating that they won't achieve this estimate. I remember in the 1990s, the Ministry of Finance for several years estimating tax revenues, and at the end of the year then collect 60%, sometimes 65 max. Mr. Speaker, check the records the last 10 years of this government, of the NNP government. We made sure that what we said in the desk estimates, end of the year, Mr. Speaker, the numbers spoke. That's why the Prime Minister said he made a lot of money. The treasury was full. Because we met our commitments to the country. We did not give one number to make it look nice in the book. And for nice song, nice on radio and TV, man. And then, Mr. Speaker, it would have been better since if the government offered cheaper, healthier alternatives and institute a phased approach to dissuade the use of excess sugar through education rather than simultaneously imposing a tax. I am saying the intention of causing people to use less sugar is good, but taxing it is a bad tax. The poor people are the ones that will suffer the most. You could help guide them. You could provide services. You could educate. You can do what you want. But they will use sugar. They are the ones who suffer. They are the ones that will suffer the most. Have a heart. The NDC slogan is a heart. Where is your heart? Where is that heart? There is no heart, Mr. Speaker. Little children, keep quiet. It would have been better, Mr. Speaker, you impose a back on basic services like this. We must consider the tax and small business. We must consider tax. We ought to compete. It is competing, you know, Mr. Speaker. Listen to this. The impact on small business, the cottage industry that is forced to compete with imported snacks with a lot of sugar in it. We do nothing about it. They have more sugar and bad too. More sugar and salt, damaging your bodies. But nothing was done with taxing sugar. Mr. Speaker, along years now, I use little sugar. I use more honey. The honey is $40 a bottle. I could pay for it. The average man can't pay. So you have to consider. And I make a point. Years ago, budget after budget presented. We considering tax on alcohol and tobacco. Because the truth is, you want to discourage people to smoke. Because I never smoked cigarette in my life. And I'm glad my parents were strong on this. Tobacco is bad. So I feel sorry when I see people smoking. So I'm not talking about the decision to warn people But you know what we did? We did a study. We did a study on the impact of increased taxes. You know what we noticed? More thing coming through the chute. The revenue drop. We get less revenue, but people smoking and they're drinking more alcohol. Babash get all over the place in Babash. It increase the consumption of alcohol. I'm not saying if you achieve it, I say all power to you. But I'm just warning what you think you'll get. I'm convinced, and as I said, if you get it, I'll shake in your hands. But I'm warning that we tried it many times and we did not succeed. So if you have improved border control and so on, and you could stop things coming through the chute, I know a member for Carriacou and Peter Martinique is here. If you could stop that, you would have to deal with them people in Carriacou. So all I'm doing, Mr. Speaker, on this is to warning of the problem that this is. I do not think that the government was right in doing this. Mr. Speaker, the reinstatement of VAT, environmental levy on electricity consumption below 500 kilowatts, is another area of concern. You know who that hitting most? The poor again. This government hit poor people. They hit poor people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will do some calculations and read out numbers. Read out numbers and show you why. Because I don't just talk. Mr. Speaker, the new National Party government removed VAT and the environmental levy for the first 500 kilowatts of electricity used by homes, and at the same time reduced the non-fuel price by 25%. This government has reintroduced the environmental levy and the non-fuel charge and imposed a VAT of 7.5%. An instant pressure this places on the average consumer with the imposition of a higher rate of VAT, while the collections of VAT on behalf of the government are given an amnesty. Isn't that, you know? The collection of VAT by the government or given amnesty, a policy taxing the poor and vulnerable, or without options to finance the people of means. People collect the VAT, is given an amnesty. But the poor people who pay it have to pay it. Have a heart. Have a heart, man. The VAT and income taxes. Listen to that. The VAT and income taxes deducted from employees, also known as pay as you earn. They call them trust taxes, meaning that they're not a charge to the business who are registered to collect them. These taxes are collected on behalf of the government, and the businesses are used as collecting agents. So you can't give them amnesty on your own revenue because they bid. No, they have to pay it to the taxpayers. Therefore, an amnesty. I don't know if some people in government may be benefiting from this. And some are businessmen. I don't know. But if you can't fit, so be fit by watching. Watching. Therefore, an amnesty that includes these taxes allow businesses to hold on to funds collected from the consumer and the workers in the country without repercussions. This is a serious, serious fault on behalf of the government. Mr. Speaker, I encourage the Minister of Finance to study the economic policy failures of the NDC government in 2008. I don't know if you talk to them. If you all don't talk, you have a right to talk. Recall that in 2009, the NDC administration and government announced an amnesty against the advice of the international community, of the IMF. I'm telling you that. And that year, the government collected 16% shortfall in revenues. In other words, if you take your from, although you said they didn't do nothing, but you still have the label and the name, talk to them. And they'll tell you what happened. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance, when announcing the amnesty, sought to suggest, listen to this one. Again, the minister liked to make what I consider to be um, attacks on his former government without any proof whatsoever. Listen to him. When announcing the amnesties, sought to suggest there was political interference in the tax department under the NNP administration in government. Mr. Speaker, like the Polish ambassador thing, I challenge the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to allow his permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance and the Controller of Inland Revenue to call the name of any minister or ministers in the NNP government who interfered with tax matters. Call them out. I challenge you. Don't come with this flimsy thing that somebody said this and somebody said that. This is an attack on the character of your former colleagues. One day it will come and hit you back, Mr. Speaker. You will get it. It is just not fair to tarnish the names of good people. If they did this, and I mentioned what happened to me in other places already, but it is a callous and irresponsible statements by the Prime Minister and Minister. And the Prime Minister said is like the Treasury Secretary. And when he speaks, people listen. The next thing I pass in, I'm going to say, oh, you big thief, you big thief. I'm killing him. You big thief. Poor me. Poor Paris. Big thief. Mr. Speaker, I just ask this institute, while the Prime Minister is making the statements, I ask him, check cess. Check cess. You know, nobody from Northwest goes west, says, they're telling them, where you going? You take a senator, a politician, and put him in charge of cess, of deputy. You take a treasurer of your party, and you put in charge of cess. Politicizing. Mr. Speaker, I have it on record. Ministers sending letters to give loans to people. Public servants in different ministries connected, sending letters. Persons connected with the government, sending letters to give loans. Man, loan free for so. No condition. Political connection. Mrs. That never happened under the new National Party's government. And you're talking about corruption, corrupt government? Clean up cess. Clean up cess. Mr. Speaker, the Port Authority calamity, Mr. Speaker. Not one person, a lot of persons are involved. Do an investigation and deal with it. 5 days, not a word from the top man in government. Mr. Speaker, I said I will talk. Want to get vexed? Vexed. I don't dislike any of you guys, and I would certainly do anything socially with you guys, but when it comes to the people's business, I am no friend. I'm saying it as it is, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I'll go get it. Let me tell you something. I've been in government on one side of the opposition. Me alone, one man, took on 14 members on the other side. Those days I spent 3 days budget presentation. Little children, behave yourselves, behave.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, may I interrupt you again? Honorable members of the House, I want you to allow the Leader of the Opposition to make his presentation.
Mr. Speaker, let me just add though, if I said anything that's wrong, they could turn up on a point of order. That's right. I didn't hear this, all I hear is chit chat. So, Mr. Speaker, The decline in growth expected in 2020 advanced by the medium-term fiscal report and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, married with argument put forward by the government and some of its worshippers, the pension payout with your spurring economic growth, I don't see that. The monies that you're talking about would spur economic growth. I can tell you, it's hardly likely that it will spur any serious economic growth in the country. But we will that is for the future, some other time when the numbers come in, we'll see, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, knowing that okay. Mr. Speaker, the overall revenue projections that the government gave appear to be impractical. I'm not surprised that the government intends to introduce to the Honorable House a loan authorization bill seeking to raise a maximum of $350 million to support current expenditure. I think they are aware that these projections, these numbers, won't come out right. It is important to note that the government is not seeking to be given the authority to raise funds for capital projects and programs that will create jobs and spur growth, but rather to finance added expenditures in wages, allowances, and other areas of professional advisory and technical support services since coming into office. Mr. Speaker, current expenditure, two noteworthy areas of increase in the government on current expenditure are the increase in compensation and consultants and advisors, completely contrary to what is expected of a serious government in the 21st century. An increase in compensation, consultants, advisors, and technical support services. Considering compensation, Mr. Speaker, compensation has increased in excess of $21 million, excluding pensions due to the creation of 201 new positions in the public service. Mr. Speaker, it's a complete opposite of what the government should be doing, reducing the size of the service. The sacrifice that were made by the old NDC government, by the NNP government in 1987, and again in 2013, by all and sundry, the public workers, the trade unions in general, and all citizens. They now bloating the public service. And overnight, raising their salary by $2,000 in traveling, not on salary, because if you put it on salary, you're going to get taxed. They sat in cabinet and gave themselves an increase. This is immoral. And telling me I didn't have the courage to raise. The Minister of Finance and the government side must know the money in the treasury is not yours. You are the custodian. And if you have to increase it, you have to consult. And you can't tell me you just go and just raise your salary. Mr. Speaker, when we were considering increases before in government, let me tell you the formula, Mr. Speaker, for what it's worth. 1996, I think. We appointed an independent committee. Derek Knight, well-known lawyer, was chairman. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank gave us one person. And Mr. Henry Joseph, who is a known supporter of the National Democratic Congress. Well known. He was on the committee as an accountant because we wanted to show that the organization is an independent organization. And we believe Henry, in his own right as a professional, can do so. They provided a report, the cabinet and the government implemented. We did so again, but we never sat there by ourselves. This is not our money. And just raise it by 2,000. You don't even start to work yet. You almost steal any money, but you raise yourself by $2,000. That's just not right, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so when we did the structural adjustment program, 70 cents on every dollar was paid on wages and salaries. Because of what we did, it went down to 45 cents on wages and salaries. And we were able to have a lot of savings on the recurrent side to invest in capital stocks. So we invested in a lot of jobs, projects, many of the projects that government tried to take credit for today. That is what we did, Mr. Speaker. As such, increasing positions in the public in the absence of a strategic plan is counterintuitive to one of the key pillars of the recently concluded structural adjustment homegrown program. We're going in the complete opposite. You're talking about transformation? We're transformating the country in the opposite direction of what it's supposed to be. Mr. Speaker, the increase in established positions for the big boys in the 2023 budget appears to be without strategic thought. People taken from the private sector and placed into government. It's the marry that with accepted pension obligations and economic crisis on our doors. We are likely to see an increased percentage of revenues collected from tax going towards employee compensation with little or nothing to be spent in another area. Mr. Speaker, this is what this government intends to do. Mr. Speaker, 20% of the positions created are clerk positions, Clerk position, this 201, a lot of clerk positions, 20%. That were minimized as part of the human resource strategy developed during the structural adjustment program. As there was a prevailing view that a large number of clerk positions were not fit for the modern public service in an area of digitization. In other words, we're going in the opposite direction, Mr. Speaker. The digital government project that we are pleased to see is being continued by this government was designed to support a paperless government, which I hear talk about, with most of the services being offered online. As such, most of the clerical work that is being done throughout the government system would largely be no more. In other words, you could create them in other places, services, more jobs, but not necessarily in the public service. Mr. Speaker, the other 80% positions created were jobs for the big wigs. Director of this, director of that, senior of that, senior of this, deputy that, all paid, most of them paid in excess of $60,000. The salary scale was not determined by the level of work, and by the Department of Public Administration, which clearly has been dismantled. The cabinet takes position and just make decision as it wishes, Mr. Speaker. Positions were even created in the elections office. Supervisor of elections, deputy, 91,000, deputy, 79,000 plus. Mr. Speaker. And when I questioned this in the Finance Committee meeting, the Prime Minister would not be surprised me saying this here, because I told him so. When I questioned it, I heard all kinds of stories about how difficult when election time people can get this, they can get. I said, but that is irrational. A whole long tribe of talk. And I sit in there and listen. That's my Prime Minister and my chairman. When he finished, I said, but you haven't said anything. I said, these are not positions as senior public servants. You know what I was told? As soon as you appoint them, they become public servants. I've never heard more foolishness in my life. So you take somebody from anywhere, you make them supervisor, and they become overnight a public servant. And I heard other people trying to justify this. Go and tell a lawyer that. Go and tell a good lawyer that. Overnight. Because you post them there. Well, I'm watching to see who they're putting in the electoral office as supervisor. And making them public servants overnight. So the public service don't exist. Well, I really don't understand this. But, Mr. Speaker, I heard $500,000 going to give to nurses. All right. If nurses get $500, I say, God for them. But you tell me, if I am not happy and you promise me permanent, and you just give me $500, and I get a traction overseas at 2,000 pounds plus and 3,000 US dollars, you think 500 won't keep me? I wish you luck. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, and I'm not saying the nurses should be married. That's their right. All I'm saying is I wish you luck if you're able to keep the nurses because of $50,500, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, efficiency measures, Mr. Speaker. The estimates show a notable increase in the current expenditure, while the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister on page 48 of the budget speech advised that government has introduced measures to reduce the cost of current expenditure in the area of travel and office supplies. This is a Prime Minister's statement, but his budget document shows significant increase in almost every vote for travel and, of course, office supplies. So again, I don't know where this was written. Macroeconomic data came from Carnage, and this speech must come from the South. Based on the estimate for revenue and expenditure, these areas have gone up by $2 million and $5 million respectively. They increased, but the Prime Minister said they're taking steps to reduce it. But they undo what the previous government was doing and kept travel to a certain limit. Sad. Words mean nothing if it is not matched by the data. Mr. Speaker, capital expenditure projects. 99% of the projects in the budget is a result of the work of the new National Party's government. I wish to specifically mention and commend the government for continuing the $16 million food security project with the World Bank and currently evident in the budget. We also commend the government for the rollout of the National Adaptation Planning for Food Security Program in partnership with FAO and funded by the Green Climate Fund. This would see another layer of support for food security in Grenada that we are not required to pay. Mr. Speaker, permit me to highlight a few areas of concerns. There is a cut in the budget for the seed program relative to what was spent in 2022 in excess of $8 million. Mr. Speaker, again, that's an attack on the poor. Wherever sacrifices have been made, the poor people or the youth must be the one to suffer. But people that collect VAT, the big persons who can afford collect VAT, they can keep it. Amnesty for them. Mr. Speaker, the seed program in part of the public assistance program under the Ministry of Social Development and supported vulnerable households to ensure that they have basic necessities. That you cut in? The reduction in spending of this program translates to persons being removed from the program. Needy assistance program that often assisted persons with food, unexpected social challenges brought on by the issue like fire, floods, burial assistance, and the like, that was reduced too. Every place the poor people benefiting cut. The transportation allowance program that supports students traveling from rural areas to TAMCC and SU was also cut. The housing assistance program which supported the refurbishment of homes for vulnerable people and provided jobs for the brigade, some of them were removed. The soft loan housing program that provided an opportunity for people who have difficulty with funding from commercial banks to obtain a home through the National Housing Authority has been cut by 85%. Poor people again. Every place the poor people had a little window. NDC in it. The Grenada Home Improvement Scheme created by the new National Party administration sought to transform the living conditions of people by removing pit latrines through its bathroom and toilet initiative. And one of the serious areas of focus is now called the Grenada Home Improvement and Resilience Project, nice name, with less budget than what was spent in 2022. Well, let me make the point. The Prime Minister or Minister of Finance Mr. Speaker, seem to see what they did in many of the programs and boasting that they did more and had more than the previous government. They looked at the approved estimate of 22 and approved, then they have the data and actual expenditure. So when you're doing a budget for the coming year, your relevant point is not the approve of the previous year, it's what was spent. Because it means some prevailing circumstances made it clear that you must have more in that area, instead of that boasting, when in fact the real allocation, actual expenditure was much more than in our budgeting. And I think they're smart. We will explore to deal with that. Mr. Speaker, all the other programs, single household program, a lot of programs, all of them were dealt an uneven hand by the National Democratic Government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the asphalt and maintenance program, I already talked about, that was cut too. Many of these programs, in fact, may have to be, when we're doing the bills, I may have to expand some of these because I have some other areas that I must deal with before I end my presentation, Mr. Speaker. Right. Mr. Speaker, I feel bad for the minister responsible for youth, who eloquently spoke to the media on the intended transitioning and transformation of the money program to the National Training Agency in 2023 budget cycle. But it's not evident in the budget. As a matter of fact, it's allocated for transitioning strategy project by the new National Party administration was removed. The Minister of Finance and Prime Minister, in his own words, is still imagining the Imani program. Mr. Speaker, after consistently bashing this program for over 15, the NDC government has no alternative plan. Mr. Speaker, I want to know who is fooling who in this whole scene. Where are the permanent jobs for these Imanis? Where are the jobs? Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister forced the Honorable Ronald Reagan to eat his words, because there is not one new project to support the youths of this nation by this administration. All the talk about transformation, not one penny more in the budget relative to what was previously spent for the young people. One thing the Honorable Minister of Youth was clear about in his utterances to the press, that the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister have supported in this budget, is a reduction in the amounts intended to spend relative to what was traditionally spent on the youths of this nation under the NNP administration. He said so, and I give him credit for honesty. Mr. Speaker, moreover, the government has wasted resources in duplicating functions with the creation of the ministry, the famous Ministry of Mobilization, Implementation and Transformation, all kind of big words, without strategically analyzing the functions of implementation still exists within the Ministry of Works, a semblance in the Ministry of Economic Development and Planning with a total budget cost, the Ministry of Planning, $104 million. 70% of the position in the Ministry of Transformation, Mobilization are paid more than 90% of what workers in the Revenue Collecting Agency and by extension the Ministry of Finance as a whole receive. In other words, Cabinet just do the thing. Nothing to do with the system, with the level, the ability, and the criteria. Cabinet have power, so they're using power. Moreover, the Ministry of Information, Transformation, and Mobilization has no legal mandate to oversee or establish performance criteria or to sanction for the lack of performance of any ministry within the service but its own. Further, the legal mandate to mobilize resources, which I noted was the vision of the ministry, which resides in the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Speaker, who are fooling who? Current expenditures balloon to satisfy the bigwigs with the promise of permanent jobs and employment and 1958 pensions for all workers that work in the public sector has become a distant memory of this administration. Further marginalization of the youths has squeezed with the reduction of spending and programs to support them. While the people are asked to finance the lavish spending with targeted loan authorization in the bill on our most recent history with a $350 million loan. Mr. Speaker, having analyzed the 2023, but it's evident that this government will continue to foster an atmosphere of fear, the loss of jobs and economic opportunities, while imposing further hardships on the people assuming office since June 24, 2022. Mr. Speaker, this government came into office. Since it came in, we have seen the loss of jobs in several areas. The road workers who used to get 5, 6 fortnights, 2 fortnights, 3 weeks of work, bush, when you pass in and the bushes are knocking your vehicle, and so on. Mr. Speaker, these road workers, they depend on Christmas activities for decent Christmas. Those of us who have steady income or able to have it, can buy the ham, they can do the things. They did government. But we saw it fit to reduce the amount we give them. They are the poorest of the poor. Have a heart. But anytime you have to make sacrifice, the poor people are the ones must make the sacrifice, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the new budget, I want to just give a breakdown of some figures for those who may not understand that we remove VAT on the 500 kilowatts of electricity consumed by households. Mr. Speaker, let me give you some numbers. Somebody who was using 300 kilowatts, the non-fuel charge under the NNP was $91.29. The fuel charge was $260.46. No environmental levy, no VAT. Total $351.75. And these are poor people because 300 kilowatts is joke. The NDC program, 300 kilowatts, similar amount. Non-fuel charge, $121.71. The fuel charge is the same, $260.46. $10 environmental levy, $15.08 VAT. Total $407.25. Poor people again. Another one, 800 kilowatts. Non-fuel charge NNP, $243.44. Fuel charge, $694.57. Mr. Speaker, $10 environmental levy, $13.69 VAT, total $961.70. Under the NDC, 800 kilowatts, $324.56 non-fuel charge. Fuel charge, $694.57. I've given you guys work to go home and do. $694.57. Check it because you might say a lie. Environmental levy, $10. VAT, $21.33. Total cost under the NDC for the same 800, $1,050.46. Mr. Speaker, and the token, most people use a lot of kilowatts, Mr. Speaker. Not the big man that getting this. Most of the revenue and the things that we give, the people in the bigger levels, at the higher levels of consumption, are the ones that would benefit the most. If you go to 1,500 kilowatts per hour and so on, that's where you will benefit a lot compared to what the NNP was giving. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the measures imposed by the Minister of Finance of this country have placed the people and the poor ones in a worse off position. I challenge them to dispute these live examples, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I now going to turn to an area. Mr. Speaker, assume I will be stop at 12:30, right? Okay? We started a bit late too.
Yes, it's 12:30.
Right, good. Very good. Okay. Okay. Mr. Speaker, the imposition of VAT will see a minimum increase in the cost of sugar of 15% without any cheaper alternative offered to them. In other words, the cost for an average person buying sugar would be 50% more than what it is doing today. I observed the deliberate insertion of the zero rated and exemption of the list of VAT items placed on the annex of the budget to give the impression that this government removed VAT on all these items. Deception. I wish to advise, Mr. Speaker, that this list was derived from the combination of exemptions given by the NDC in 2008 and the NNP government then. While the people are forced to pay increased taxes on basic commodities, and amnesty is given to businesses that have failed to remit some of the taxes that were given to them to pass the government. Mr. Speaker, we must ask ourselves, whose interest does this government serve? Mr. Speaker, all of this is cast in an environment where the actions of the leaders in government are ad hoc at best and often seek to malign, to intimidate people, thereby creating an unhealthy atmosphere in the country. Mr. Speaker, allow me to underscore this point. Mr. Speaker, the public service is expected to carry out the policies and programs of the government. Mr. Speaker, there is a fear prevailing in the public service today that has never been the case before. That has never been the case before. People are promoted without any basis at all. Others are marginalized and sent on leave. Mr. Speaker, some people, not necessarily always politicians, but some people who perceived to have connections with top members of the government who are in the public service are doing their own thing. Mr. Speaker, there is a clear intimidation of workers, Mr. Speaker. Those who don't want to know, let them not know. Mr. Speaker, the attack on past cabinet members, Mr. Speaker, is something that should never happen. I mentioned this before. The attack on the faith organization. Many of these people are poor people again. They work. The contracts was passed at cabinet. The people are employed. The government has a legal obligation. If the project had some weaknesses, deal with that. But pay the poor people for their service. They are not responsible. Little children, stop talking while Papa talking.
Mr. Speaker.
Grandpa speaking, so don't talk.
Mr. Speaker, I stand on a point of order. Standing order 38. 3 and 4. We are not little children. We are members of parliament in this honorable house.
Mr. Speaker, what's the point of order?
Um,
What is the point of order? There was not a point of order.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, just hold 1 minute, please.
Was not a point of order. You don't know what a point of order is. When you get to address, you can talk then.
All right. I will just address another matter here. But when you stand to make a point of order in the House, you address that to the chair, to the speaker. Right? Please do, members, address it to the speaker. And the speaker will determine if it goes forward to the person to whom is attended. All right? Let's do it this way, please. Honorable Leader of Opposition, you may continue.
Mr. Speaker, I did not even call name, you know. Little children could be little children in Dominica, St. Lucia. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, I said if something went wrong with the faith organization, pay the workers. It's not your money. You pay people who refuse to work. And you feel right to pay it. Even when the court say it should not be paid. I'm glad for them. But those who work, they are poorer people without salaries, have a conscience. Pay them for their service and deal with the organization and whatever the problems that existed. But they should not pay the price as ordinary folks. And while you are taking $2,000, while drawing another $6,000 and $7,000, have a mercy on those people. Have a mercy. Pay the ordinary people. Have a mercy. Mr. Speaker, attack on concrete roads in St. George's. You know, you have to be an engineer. You have to understand roads. You have to understand technicalities. You understand data. If you don't understand that, don't talk. Did you check the amount of people in faith? Did you check the average salary and see how it come up? And the numbers that make sense? You didn't do that. A lot of money, too much money. What is that? That's your interpretation. And it's an interpretation which is not based on facts. Mr. Speaker, therefore I move to something to my heart, my constituency, Northwest St. George's. 38 years of service. Mr. Speaker, when I returned home in 1984 and ran, I got 60% of the votes. The opposition got 40%. And therefore, it is known that the party I ran for split 3 ways. The NDC now in government was one part of the NNP, and Brizan, who was leader of the NDC then, he had about 15% support in Northwest St. George's. Because when the poll was done, the GLP is getting 4 to 5%. The NDP was getting 15%, and I was getting 60% with being aligned with Mr. Blaze. Sorry, 45%. So 45 and 15. So when the election was run and Brizan joined with us, I got 60%, and there we go. So the poll that done by Selwyn Ryan of Trinidad and Tobago was absolutely perfect. So I got 60%. So when Brizan left and formed his own party, he left with some members at my constituency. When myself and Mr. Blaze split, and I was out of government, Mr. Blaze had support in certain parts of the constituency. So technically, I should have lost that election in 1990. So Speaker, because of the work that I did with people, I got 70% of the vote, and I gave you work to do. Check the electoral results of the 1990 general elections, you will see exactly what I'm talking about. I don't play with numbers. Mr. Speaker, the love, it went up to 91% support. 91% in 1999. Mr. Speaker, the love and support. I feel, as I said, I am up the mountaintop. I feel like someone was given a special privilege. I'm honored to be given the support by the people at all levels in the constituency. The love. Even those that do not vote for me. We respect each other, and none of them could say that I deliberately treat them differently, because that is not in my DNA. Mr. Speaker, because of that love, today I want to give special thanks to those persons in Northwest St. George's who have honored me and given me a privilege that I will never be able to forget until the last breath of my body. Mr. Speaker, I see now there is an imposter going around playing representative. An imposter going around playing representative, offering all kinds of stuff, offering dandy and pedia and everything. People do not give up love for fantasy, for games. People do not give up that. Let them come. Let them come. I wonder, I just laugh, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the road work. There are people, little mayors and little village tyrants come giving work and saying, if you don't come to my home, you can't get work. What nonsense is this? Telling people if you don't come to my home, you can't get work. The poor people of the constituency, some of them need it. What sort of management is? The Prime Minister and Minister of Finance must understand this, that this is on you. Because you are the manager that, if that happens in a time that I was in government, that person will be called in. That person. But I assume that is a policy of the government. Keep going. The fisherman project in Bushaju, games were played. All kinds of reasons were given. The housing project, if the Chinese understand they're going over, you have to give new application. What nonsense is that? Government is a continuum activity. You are just a custodian today. Tomorrow you'll be out. Tomorrow you'll be out. Get it right. So treat people well. Whether in government or opposition, Mr. Speaker, I have no problems when I walk the streets of this country. You know why? Because I'm the same person, whether I'm in government or opposition. Treat people badly. When you get out of government, you will find out. Mr. Speaker, the housing brigade. So I hear there is a mayor say that he decided who get house in Bushaju. And I assume it's happening all over the country. There's some mayors, you know. Mayors have been created. Maybe we have local government already. They create them. You think it's so? The gentlemen, some people who are hated in the constituency are the ones they're choosing to represent. And I say, all power to you. The young people are saying, what? He? Mr. Speaker, that is the level. Mr. Speaker, I now conclude my conclusion. Mr. Speaker, my administration respected the voice of the people on June 23rd. I called on the Prime Minister then, and I said to him, congratulations. I didn't wait. That is my DNA. The people's voice is always the voice of God, in my view. I may not be happy, but you have to accept it. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said, when I told him he thanked me, and I told him, I said, I did a joke.
Member for St. George.
Sorry, yes.
West?
They said, Madam
Please be-
Deputy Speaker, sorry.
Please be advised that the Madam Deputy Speaker is in the House. Thank you, sir.
Madam, my deepest apology. Madam Deputy Speaker. Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker. So, I called him, Minister of Finance and Prime Minister, and said, congratulations. And I made a joke, I said, don't spoil the Michelin. Because I'm going to pull you up. So he laughed and he said, when I settle down, I will call you so that we can chat. And I said, I'm at your disposal. I don't receive the call. But the next thing I heard, the Prime Minister in his first speech said that he got a call from me and he made it clear. I didn't call him, he called me. That I thought was unfortunate. Did not show the kind of understanding that you expect. I was reaching out to the Prime Minister and he's saying, he didn't call me, that's in his speech. In other words, as if I was begging him. I beg for nothing from this government. Mr. Speaker, in doing so, it left the finances of this country in the best position that it has ever been in recent history. We left a record of prudent fiscal performance and positioned this country as a resilient path to post-COVID recovery, growth, and development. This is an indisputable marker against which economic management and the leadership of this administration will be judged. That is how the present government will be judged. To quote many honest persons from the other side, we left them a full treasury. The challenge will be to sustain the excellent record of management while providing the benefits of years of sacrifice that the NP administration did promise to the people of this country. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the early warning signals are now plainly audible for all to hear, not just to see. Madam Deputy Speaker, but to hear after the unfortunate delivery of a 3.5-hour budget statement by the Minister of Finance. A budget statement full of rhetoric, but empty on substance. We must all be very concerned about the ability of this administration to continue on the path of sound economic management.
Deputy Speaker, in the chair. Correction. The Speaker, in the chair.
Such an imbalance, Mr. Speaker, will be devastating to those by whose circumstances must from time to time lean on the state to take them through difficult periods. I urge the administration to rethink several areas of concern in the budget. For those who are socially, economically vulnerable, including the working poor, single mothers, our youth, and our elderly, please think again about them. Mr. Speaker, apart from a new record of lengthiness, in the end, the budget statement of 2023 will be remembered for a few distinguishing features. The first is that it uses the wrong point of reference, budgeted where actual outturn should be used. It unfortunately makes erroneous and baseless comparisons. The budget statement begins this way, and the baseless comparisons are made throughout. Mr. Speaker, if this were a literature paper, I would give it a passing grade. But this is a budget statement meant to outline and announce serious policies on revenue and expenditure of the people's resources. It falls far short of a passing grade. But to be fair, Mr. Speaker, there were some light moments, such as the announcement on condoms. I don't know why the Prime Minister chose that one. Maybe he knows something about members on his side that I don't know. But Prime Minister, if you know, tell me in secret. The second is that in substantial parts, the budget statement tells a different story to the numbers and figures presented in the estimates of revenue and expenditure prepared by the profession team at the Ministry of Finance. In other words, I cannot blame them. For example, to advance as the Minister of Finance does, that the implementation rate for a particular project was 10%, and to boldly use 2020 as reference point is nothing more than show boating. Every single project in virtually every country in the world suffered from low implementation and from many non-implementation on the account of COVID-19. 2 years of COVID-19. The Minister of Finance said little or nothing, passing words, as if that didn't exist. But a simple estimate of implementation can be achieved by estimating the approved capital expenditure against outturn. He didn't do that. In the end, Mr. Speaker, precisely what does the Minister of Finance intended to reap from these fallacies? At the end, the people of Grenada will be left to choose between the numbers presented in the estimates of revenue and expenditure, or on the illusions which the Minister of Finance attempts to create. We again asked, to what end? Paradoxically, those are the areas in the budget which resonate. But these areas highlight correctness of many of the policies introduced by our administration, NNP. But it would be too much for the Minister of Finance to have stated plainly that in several key areas this budget statement reflects policy continuity with the NNP. Instead, descriptors such as new, revisioned, reimagined are thrown in here and there to give the impression that this is a change, of course. By this act of deception, the budget statement disregards the sacrifice of the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and PT Martinique to bring us to this point of buoyancy. Mr. Speaker, we must not be unkind to the Minister of Finance. It is for this reason what gets measured gets done. In an adage, we are all whole as common ground. Mr. Speaker, at the end of 3.5 hours, we must ask ourselves, what can be seriously measured? What seriously will be achieved? Sure, we can measure the expenditures and the implementation of taxation on the people. But what about outcomes? What about results? Mr. Speaker, I leave this August House with these cogent reflections. Few administrations have survived the fallout of COVID-19. That's a fact worldwide. The NNP administration rests confident in the knowledge that it did manage the country through major crises. When the people of Grenada gave us the mandate to lead in 2013, we marshaled the resolve of the people of the country and took out the country from the throes of debt, the inability to meet public sector wages, and to say nothing of pensions and gratuity. Mr. Speaker, we took this country from the desperate place managed by an NDC administration that failed the people of this beautiful land of ours. And we joined forces with the Grenadian people to pull back this country from the brink. The scripture tells us, Mr. Speaker, in Hebrews 11, verse 7, by faith, Noah, being warned of God and of things not seen as yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to save his household. Unquote. Mr. Speaker, there is no denying that it is our stewardship and prudent management that enable our country to successfully navigate through these challenges. Where other countries, larger and more powerful than ours, have stumbled. We worked shoulder to shoulder with the people of this beautiful land and proceeded to construct a society worthy of sacrifices, struggle, ingenuity, innovation, entrepreneurship, and creativity of our beautiful people. This required sacrifice by all and sundry. But as a people, we are achieving this. We are being led from the front in 2020, defying the naysayers and achieving one of the best records of COVID management. It was our preparedness, as the scripture admonishes us to do in Hebrews 11 chapter verse 7, that provided us with the foresight to build the finances of this country. Which provided us with the ability to pay the payment of pension obligations in keeping with the recommendations of the judgment of the court, and the decision of the cabinet based on the recommendation as contained in the report of Pension Strategy Solution Committee. It was the ark, Mr. Speaker, as I come to an end, built through the leadership of the NNP, the labor and sacrifices of the people of Grenada, including all members of the trade unions, that made it possible for the payment of pensions at the most difficult time in the world economy. Mr. Speaker, the administration has access to the reports prepared by the Pension Strategy Committee, which raises all relevant issues of pensions. It reveals, Mr. Speaker, all that we need to know. We again, Mr. Speaker, led by in front, defining naysayers and achieving great things. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, by the words of Isaiah 43, verse 2, and I quote, "When thou passest through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through fire, thou shalt not be burnt, never shall the flame kindle upon thee." Mr. Speaker, as I said, I have been to the mountaintop. I am satisfied that we've done what we have to do in the time that we have to do service. I look forward to the continuation of the work of this country. I will give my life and my time and hours to help anyone, Mr. Speaker, that are doing good for this country, no matter what the label NMP or NDC is. Love for country, Mr. Speaker. I thank you and wish you all the best.